At 06:55 hours on June 11, 1940, air raid sirens wail across Valletta. 7 Savoia Marchetti, SM-79 bombers flying from Catania, in Sicily, cross Malta's coastline at 12,000 feet. They are followed by 48 more bombers and 21 fighters. The island's defenses consist of 42 anti-aircraft guns, less than 1/4 of the 172 recommended by the Committee of Imperial Defense in 1939, and 3 Gloucester Gladiator biplanes. The Gladiators are obsolete, withdrawn from frontline service in Britain 18 months earlier. Their maximum speed is 253 miles per hour. The Italian bombers can outrun them. The fighters scramble anyway. By nightfall, the Italians have conducted 8 separate raids, dropping 142 bombs on the airfields at Lucca Halfar and Taccali. 1 Gladiator is shot down. The pilot survives. The Italians lose 1 bomber to anti-aircraft fire, and possibly 3 more to the defending fighters. Accounts vary. It is, by later standards, a modest beginning. The bombardment will continue for 17 days. When it ends, Malta will have endured 3,343 air raids, totaling 2,357 hours under attack, equivalent to 98 days spent in shelters while bombs fall above. The island will receive 15,000 tons of bombs, 4 times the tonnage dropped on Dresden. In April 1942 alone, Malta will receive 6,700 tons in 282 raids, more than London received in any single month of the Blitz. This is the story of how an island 122 square miles in area, 3.5 times the size of Manhattan, held against sustained aerial bombardment, naval blockade, and starvation. It is also the story of how that island, while under siege, sank more Axis shipping than any other Allied base in the Mediterranean, strangling Rommel's supply lines and making victory in North Africa possible. The mythology focuses on heroic resistance. The reality is more complex. Malta survived because Britain poured resources into convoys that often ended in disaster, because radar and intelligence allowed defenders to husband scarce resources, and because the Axis never committed to the amphibious invasion that would have ended the siege in days. Malta sits 96 kilometers south of Sicily, 288 kilometers north of Libya, 290 kilometers east of Tunisia. The island's strategic value is geographical. It controls the central Mediterranean, bisecting Axis supply routes from Italy to North Africa. Ships leaving Italian or Sicilian ports for Tripoli or Benghazi must pass within striking distance of Malta. Submarines, aircraft, and surface ships based on the island can intercept these convoys. In 1940 and 1941, Malta-based forces account for 75% of Axis shipping sunk by aircraft in the Mediterranean. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Panzer Army Africa, recognizes this immediately. In May 1941, he warns Benito Mussolini, "Without Malta, the Axis will end by losing control of North Africa." The British understand Malta's value equally well. In peacetime, the island serves as a way station on the trade route to Egypt, the Suez Canal, India, and the Far East. In war, it becomes the only Allied base between Gibraltar and Alexandria. When France falls in June 1940 and Italy enters the war, the Mediterranean becomes an Axis lake except for the 2 British anchors at either end and the fortress in the middle. If Malta falls, British forces in Egypt become isolated. Supply convoys to Alexandria must sail around Africa, adding weeks to transit times. The Mediterranean ceases to be a viable theater of operations. The Royal Navy evacuates its Mediterranean Fleet headquarters from Valletta to Alexandria in October 1939, recognizing Malta's vulnerability to Italian air attack. The island's garrison in June 1940 consists of approximately 15,000 British troops supported by local militia. Air defenses are inadequate. The 42 anti-aircraft guns can barely cover the 3 airfields and the naval dockyard. Fighter defense is non-existent. The RAF maintains no fighter squadrons on Malta. The 3 Gladiators that rise to meet the first Italian raid are naval aircraft Gloucester Sea Gladiators from HMS Gloucester, crated and stored in a warehouse when that ship departed. They are assembled by RAF mechanics who cannibalize parts from destroyed aircraft to create 3 airworthy machines. The defenders name them Faith, Hope, and Charity. This is propaganda, excellent propaganda, suggesting that divine providence protects the island. The reality is more prosaic. The Gladiators fly because skilled mechanics work through the night building flyable aircraft from scrap. The pilots are RF and Fleet Air Arm volunteers with minimal training on the type. They fly against Italian bombers that are faster, better armed, and present in overwhelming numbers. That they achieve any victories is remarkable. That Malta survives the first 6 months of Italian bombardment is due less to the gladiators than to Italian bombing inaccuracy and the reluctance of the Regia Aeronautica to press home attacks in the face of anti-aircraft fire. The Savoia Marchetti, SM Tatus 79, Sparviero, is Italy's standard medium bomber in June 1940. It is a 3-engine aircraft with a crew of 5 carrying a maximum bomb load of 2,756 pounds at a cruise speed of 267 miles per hour. Maximum range is 43 miles. Defensive armament consists of 3 machine guns, one 12.7mm Breda Safat in a dorsal turret, and 2 7.7mm Lewis guns in lateral positions. The aircraft is effective as a torpedo bomber in the Mediterranean, but mediocre as a level bomber. Bombing accuracy is poor, particularly from high altitude where anti-aircraft fire is less effective. The Regia Aeronautica drops thousands of bombs on Malta's airfields in the summer of 1940. Few hit runways or hangars. Most fall in fields or residential areas, killing civilians and destroying homes, but leaving the military infrastructure largely intact. This pattern continues through the fall of 1940. Italian raids are frequent but ineffective. The 3 Gladiators later reinforced to 5 operational aircraft intercept, when possible. Anti-aircraft guns fire thousands of rounds. The psychological impact on the civilian population is severe. Air raid sirens become part of daily routine. Thousands shelter in caves and tunnels. Schools and businesses close, but the military impact is minimal. British convoys continue reaching Malta. Submarines refuel and rearm. Aircraft fly offensive missions against Italian shipping. The island remains a functioning base. Italian reluctance to attempt an amphibious invasion solidifies after November 11, 1940, when Fleet Air Arm ferry Swordfish torpedo bombers attack the Italian fleet at Taranto. 21 obsolete biplanes flying from HMS Illustrious sink 1 battleship and damage 2 others, plus a cruiser and destroyers. Italian naval confidence never recovers. Surface ships become reluctant to venture far from port. The Italian Navy, which possesses amphibious capability and sufficient transport to land troops on Malta, refuses to risk its remaining capital ships. An invasion plan exists, Operation C3, but it requires naval superiority that the Italians no longer believe they possess. The Germans recognize what the Italians do not. Malta must be neutralized or captured. In December 1940, Luftwaffe units transfer from the Battle of Britain to Sicily. By January 1941, approximately 300 German aircraft Junkers, U-87 Stuka dive bombers, U-88 medium bombers, Heinkel, Hu-111 bombers, Messerschmitt, Bf-109 and Bf-110 fighters arrive at Sicilian airfields. They bring experience from Poland, France, and Britain. They bring doctrine emphasizing precision attack. And they bring absolute confidence in their superiority over the RAF. At 1300 hours on January 10, 1941, HMS Illustrious is 50 miles northwest of Malta, returning to port after conducting airstrikes in the central Mediterranean. The carrier has launched reconnaissance aircraft, but maintains no combat air patrol. Fuel is being conserved. 40 Ju-87 Stukas and Ju-88 bombers escorted by Bf-110 fighters attack in waves. The dive bombers are extraordinarily accurate. 6 bombs hit Illustrious within 10 minutes. The armored flight deck saves the ship from catastrophic damage, but fires rage below decks. 1 bomb penetrates the armored hangar deck. Casualties are severe: 126 killed, 91 wounded. The carrier limps into Grand Harbor, trailing smoke, steering erratically, her flight deck pockmarked with craters. The Germans follow her. Over the next week, Luftwaffe bombers attack Grand Harbor, repeatedly targeting the crippled carrier. This is the Illustrious Blitz, a sustained campaign to sink the carrier before it can be repaired and to destroy Malta's dockyard facilities. Between January 16th and 19th, German bombers conduct 58 sorties against the harbor. They drop approximately 250 tons of bombs. Illustrious is hit again. Surrounding buildings are devastated. The dockyard church in Sanglia receives a direct hit. Dozens die in the ruins. Homes collapse. Fires sweep through residential districts. For the first time, Malta experiences concentrated, accurate bombing by professional aviators determined to destroy specific targets. The carrier survives. Emergency repairs allow Illustrious to depart Malta on January 23rd, sailing for Alexandria. She will spend months in repair facilities and never return to the Mediterranean, but her survival demonstrates what German air power cannot achieve against a determined defense: absolute destruction. The Luftwaffe hits Illustrious multiple times with heavy bombs. The ship survives because her armored flight deck and internal compartmentation contain damage. This lesson that even concentrated air attack cannot guarantee destruction of hardened targets is one the Germans never fully absorb. Through the spring of 1941, German bombers continue attacking Malta. The pattern is consistent mass raids by 20 to 60 aircraft targeting airfields and harbor facilities, met by anti-aircraft fire and the few defending fighters. By April, Malta has received Hurricane fighters flown from aircraft carriers that approach within range and launch their aircraft. The Hurricanes are vastly superior to Gladiators. They are still inferior to Bf-109s. German fighters claim 42 victories in their first 4 months over Malta without losing a single aircraft. British fighter pilot morale collapses. Replacement pilots arrive with minimal training and die within days. The few experienced pilots accumulate dozens of missions, exhaustion mounting, knowing that each sortie reduces their survival odds. Yet Malta continues functioning. Submarines operate from Grand Harbor. Wellington bombers strike Italian ports. The island's offensive capability remains intact, inflicting continuous losses on Axis shipping. In April and May 1941, 65% of Axis supplies shipped to North Africa fail to arrive. Submarines and aircraft from Malta account for most of these losses. Rommel receives tanks, ammunition, and fuel in quantities insufficient for sustained operations. His offensive stalls. He blames Malta. In June 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. Luftwaffe units withdraw from Sicily for deployment to the Eastern Front. The pressure on Malta suddenly eases. Italian bombers resume attacks, but they are less frequent and less accurate than German raids. British forces on Malta go on the offensive. Force K, a surface-striking force of cruisers and destroyers, establishes itself in Grand Harbor. Submarines increase operations. Aircraft bomb Sicilian airfields. From June through December 1941, Axis supply convoys to North Africa suffer catastrophic losses. Malta-based forces sink or damage hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping. Rommel's complaints to Berlin become desperate. Without supplies, he cannot advance. Without neutralizing Malta, supplies cannot reach him. In December 1941, the Luftwaffe returns to Sicily in force. Fliegerkorps II redeployed from the Eastern Front, where winter weather grounds most operations, brings 400 aircraft, including bomber and dive bomber groups. They arrive with explicit orders: destroy Malta's offensive capability. The attacks begin immediately and continue without respite through the spring of 1942. This is the decisive phase of the siege, the period when Malta comes closest to collapse. The statistics are numbing. In January 1942, Malta endures 262 air raids. In February, 236 raids. In March, 275 raids. In April, 282 raids. The pattern is consistent: multiple raids per day, often targeting the same locations repeatedly. Airfields are cratered, repaired during the night, cratered again the following morning. Runways become patchwork quilts of fresh concrete, filling bomb craters. Ground crews work continuously, repairing aircraft by candlelight. In damaged hangars, moving planes between airfields to prevent total destruction, hiding flyable aircraft in blast pens scraped from Malta's limestone bedrock. Fighter losses mount catastrophically. In the first 3 months of 1942, Malta loses more aircraft than arrive as reinforcements. By March, operational fighters number fewer than 30. By April, fewer than 10. Luftwaffe bombers operate with near-impunity bombing from medium altitude in formations that anti-aircraft guns struggle to disrupt. The defenders fire thousands of shells daily. In April 1942, anti-aircraft batteries expend more ammunition than during the entire year of 1941, but German aircraft fly in tight formations, mutual support reducing losses. Luftwaffe bomber crews develop contempt for Malta's defenses, noting in reports that concentrated flak does not deter our attacks. Submarine operations cease in February 1942. The submarines cannot refuel, fuel stocks are exhausted. Surface ships withdraw in January after Force K suffers devastating losses in a minefield off Tripoli. Malta's offensive capability collapses precisely when Rommel needs supplies most. Axis convoy losses drop to 15% in February, 10% in March. Supplies flow to North Africa. Rommel prepares a major offensive. Malta, once the key to Allied strategy in the Mediterranean, becomes a besieged fortress consuming resources while contributing nothing to the war effort. The civilian population suffers most. Food rationing tightens continuously. By April 1942, daily rations provide 500 calories per person, barely sufficient to sustain life. Bread is mixed with potato flour and sawdust to extend supplies. Meat is unavailable except as occasional canned rations. Fresh vegetables are luxuries. Children develop malnutrition-related diseases. The death rate among the elderly increases. Fuel for cooking and heating is rationed to 2 hours per day. Most civilians spend those hours in shelters because air raids occur at all times, making surface activity dangerous. The physical destruction is immense. By May 1942, 10 Watson 761 buildings are destroyed or require reconstruction. Another 20,000 suffer damage requiring repair. In Valletta, entire streets disappear. The Royal Opera House receives a direct hit on April 7, 1942, and burns to the ground. The Auberge d'Italie, a Renaissance building dating to 1574, is gutted by fire. Churches, schools, hospitals all bear damage. The population, 270,000 in June 1940, lives increasingly underground, occupying natural caves and excavated shelters. Families establish permanent homes in tunnels beneath Valletta and the three cities. Children are born in shelters. Schools operate underground. Normal life ceases. Survival becomes the only objective. On April 15, 1942, King George VI awards the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian decoration, for valor to the entire population of Malta. The citation reads, "To honor her brave people, I award the George Cross to the island fortress of Malta, to bear witness to a heroism and devotion that will long be famous in history." This is unprecedented. The George Cross has never been awarded to a collective entity. It is given to individuals for acts of exceptional courage. Extending it to an entire population acknowledges that Malta's resistance is a collective effort, that every civilian enduring the bombardment contributes to the island's survival. The award is politically necessary. Morale on Malta is collapsing. Food stocks will last perhaps 6 more weeks. Fuel is nearly exhausted. Fighter defenses are minimal. If the civilian population loses hope, civil disorder becomes possible. The George Cross serves to remind the Maltese that Britain recognizes their sacrifice and will not abandon them. Whether Britain can actually reinforce Malta is another question. 2 convoy operations in June 1942, Harpoon from Gibraltar and Vigorous from Alexandria, result in disaster. Harpoon loses 4 of 6 merchant ships. Only 2 reach Malta, delivering 15,000 tons of supplies. Vigorous is turned back by Italian naval forces and air attacks. No ships reach Malta. The tanker Kentucky, sister ship to the American-built Ohio, is bombed and sunk. Malta receives no fuel. By July 1942, Malta possesses aviation fuel sufficient for perhaps 3 weeks of operations. Food stocks will last until September. After that, surrender becomes inevitable. The island's 270,000 civilians and 30,000 military personnel cannot survive without resupply. The British government understands this. In late July, planning begins for Operation Pedestal, the largest and most heavily escorted convoy ever assembled for Malta. The convoy will consist of 14 merchant ships carrying 85,000 tons of supplies. The most critical vessel is SS Ohio, an American-built tanker, 14,000 tons displacement, carrying 11,500 tons of kerosene and diesel fuel. Without Ohio's cargo, Malta's aircraft and submarines cannot operate. Without aircraft and submarines, Malta cannot threaten Axis shipping. Without threatening shipping, Malta becomes strategically irrelevant. The entire Mediterranean strategy depends on one ship reaching port. The escort is massive 2 battleships, HMS Nelson and HMS Rodney. 3 aircraft carriers, HMS Victorious, HMS Indomitable, and HMS Eagle, 7 cruisers, 32 destroyers. Additionally, 9 submarines deploy to intercept Italian surface ships if they sortie. The carrier HMS Furious, escorted by 8 destroyers, will accompany the convoy as far as the Skirky Channel, flying off 38 Spitfire fighters to reinforce Malta before returning to Gibraltar. The total force, merchant ships escorts, support vessels, numbers 65 ships, the largest convoy operation undertaken to that point in the war. At 2200 hours on August 9, 1942, the convoy passes through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. Axis intelligence detects it immediately. Italian reconnaissance aircraft shadow the convoy. German and Italian submarines converge on predicted intercept points. Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica bombers prepare for maximum effort operations. The Axis understands what the British understand: if this convoy fails, Malta falls. August 10th begins quietly. The convoy maintains formation, steaming east at 14 knots. Aircraft from the carriers fly combat air patrols. Destroyers screen against submarines. At 13:15 hours, approximately 175 miles west of Algeria, U-73, a German Type 7IB submarine, commanded by Capitan Lieutenant Helmut Rosenbaum, fires 4 torpedoes at HMS Eagle. All 4 hit. The carrier lists immediately capsizes within 4 minutes and sinks. Of 927 crew, aboard 160 die. The survivors, many covered in fuel oil, are rescued by destroyers. Eagle's aircraft 16C Hurricanes are lost. The convoy continues. August 11th passes with minor air attacks. German reconnaissance aircraft probe the defenses but do not press home attacks. The convoy's air cover Hurricanes and Fulmars from the remaining carriers maintains continuous patrols. At 20:30 hours, as the convoy approaches Sardinia, Italian bombers attack. They achieve no hits. The escort's anti-aircraft fire is intense. The bombers withdraw. This is the pattern: constant harassment, probing attacks, but no sustained assault. The Axis is waiting. The convoy must pass through the Skirky Channel, the narrow waters between Tunisia and Sicily. Their concentrated forces will attack. At 0900 hours on August 12th, the convoy enters range of Axis air bases in Sicily and Sardinia. The attacks begin immediately and continue without pause until nightfall. At 09:15 hours, 36 Ju-88 bombers attack in level formation. Anti-aircraft fire is intense but ineffective against high-altitude formation bombing. The merchant ship Deucalion is hit twice and set afire. She drops out of convoy steering toward the Tunisian coast and is sunk later by Italian torpedo bombers. At 1200 hours, 70 Ju-87 Stukas attack in screaming dives. The destroyer HMS Foresight is hit and disabled. The merchant ship Empire Hope is hit, catches fire, and explodes. 12 more Stukas attack the battleship Nelson, scoring no hits but near misses that damage her hull. At 1250 hours, a coordinated attack by Ju-88s and Italian SM-79 torpedo bombers comes from multiple directions simultaneously. The escort's anti-aircraft guns fire continuously, creating a barrage that downs several attackers but cannot stop the assault. Indomitable is hit by 3 bombs. Her flight deck is wrecked. She can no longer operate aircraft. The destroyers HMS Foresight and Fury are badly damaged. The merchant ship SS Ohio, steaming 4th in the starboard column, is hit amidships by a torpedo from the Italian submarine Axum. The explosion is massive. A pillar of flame erupts from Ohio's deck. Burning kerosene bubbles up from ruptured tanks. The ship seems doomed. Captain Dudley, Mason Ohio's master, orders engines stopped and all hands to fight the fire. The crew, including 24 Royal Navy and Royal Artillery gunners assigned as anti-aircraft defense, attack the flames with deck hoses. The fire is out of control. Small gouts of burning fuel spatter the deck up to 30 meters from the main blaze. If the fire reaches the main cargo tanks, 11,500 tons of aviation fuel will explode. The ship will vaporize. Mason knows this. His crew knows this. They fight the fire anyway. Within 30 minutes, the flames are extinguished. Engineers restart the engines. Ohio resumes station in convoy, making 13 knots despite the torpedo damage. The convoy continues. At 18:55 hours on August 12th, as dusk approaches Force Z, the battleships and carriers turns back toward Gibraltar as planned. The heavy escorts cannot risk passage through the Skirky Channel at night, where submarines and motor torpedo boats operate with advantage. The merchant convoy continues with Force X-4 cruisers and 11 destroyers under Rear Admiral Harold Burrow. The carriers have launched all available aircraft to provide final air cover, but most must ditch or land at Malta due to fuel limitations. The convoy is now without carrier-based fighter protection, dependent on Malta-based Beaufighters that can barely reach the area and must transit the most dangerous waters in the Mediterranean at night. The Italian submarines are waiting. At 19:30 hours, submarine Axum fires again, missing. At 20:35 hours, submarine Alagi torpedoes the cruiser HMS Cairo. The cruiser lists heavily and is scuttled by British destroyers to prevent capture. At 20:42 hours, submarine Desi torpedoes the cruiser HMS Nigeria and the tanker Ohio simultaneously. Nigeria is badly damaged and turns back toward Gibraltar. Ohio is hit again, this time on the starboard side aft. The explosion wrecks the engine room. Steam pipes rupture. The engine stops. Power fails. The ship goes dead in the water. Captain Mason orders damage assessment. The report is grim. The keel is likely cracked. The engine cannot be restarted quickly. Steering is damaged. The ship is taking on water. Ohio drops out of convoy. At 2100 hours, German night bombers attack 37 aircraft, dropping bombs and flares. The convoy scatters. 3 merchant ships are hit. The freighter Clan Ferguson explodes and sinks. Brisbane Star is hit forward, her bow badly damaged, but continues. Empire Hope, already damaged, is hit again and sinks. The convoy, which entered the Skirky Channel with 13 merchant ships, is reduced to 10. Ohio is not among them. The tanker wallows in the darkness, her crew working frantically to restart the engine. At 0200 hours on August 13th, Italian motor torpedo boats attack. The convoy, scattered by the previous air attack, presents multiple targets. The boats attack individually from different directions, making coordinated defense impossible. The cruiser HMS Manchester is torpedoed twice and so badly damaged that her captain orders her scuttled. The freighter Almeria Likes is torpedoed and abandoned. Her crew rows toward the Tunisian coast in lifeboats. The tanker Ohio, still dead in the water, is bypassed by the motor torpedo boats, which prioritize moving targets. Captain Mason's crew restarts one engine. The ship makes 5 knots, steering manually, because the automatic steering is damaged. Dawn on August 13th brings renewed air attacks. At 800 hours, 50 German and Italian bombers attack the surviving merchantmen. Wimarama is hit by 3 bombs and explodes. Glenorchy is hit and set afire. Rochester Castle is damaged, but continues. Ohio, struggling alone far behind the convoy, is attacked by 12 Ju-87 Stukas. The tanker's anti-aircraft guns fire continuously. One Stuka is hit and, fatally damaged, dives directly into Ohio's deck. The aircraft's bomb detonates on impact. Another Stuka, crippled by anti-aircraft fire, crashes into Ohio amidships. The combined impact breaks the ship's back. The keel fractures, the deck buckles, the engine stops again. Ohio settles lower in the water, her bow and stern pointing upward, the center section sagging. The ship is broken in half, held together only by the bottom plating and deck beams. Captain Mason surveys the damage. By all engineering standards, Ohio should sink. The center section is flooded. The engine room is wrecked. The ship has no power, no steering, and a broken keel. But the cargo tanks, built with internal compartmentation, provide buoyancy. The ship floats, barely sitting lower in the water with each hour as slow flooding continues. Mason refuses to abandon ship. He signals for assistance. The destroyers HMS Penn and HMS Ledbury respond, turning back from the convoy to assist the stricken tanker. From 1400 hours on August 13th until 0930 hours on August 15th, the destroyers Penn and Ledbury wage a desperate battle to bring Ohio to Malta. The tanker cannot be towed. Conventionally, the broken keel means towing from the bow pulls the ship apart. Instead, the destroyers position themselves on either side, lashing Ohio between them, providing structural support and propulsion. The 3 ships proceed as a single unit at 2 to 3 knots, the destroyer's engines, providing thrust, Ohio's hull acting as an anchor. Progress is measured in hundreds of meters per hour. The Axis continues attacking. On August 14th, German bombers strike repeatedly. Bombs fall around the struggling ships, near misses raising enormous columns of water that drench the crews. One bomb hits Ohio's deck near the bridge, penetrating to the cargo tanks but failing to detonate. If it had exploded, Ohio and both destroyers would have been destroyed. The bomb remains lodged in the deck, a visible reminder that survival depends on luck as much as skill. The tanker settles deeper. Water floods additional compartments. The bow and stern rise higher. The ship resembles a V, bent in the middle, held together by will and desperation. Spitfires from Malta provide air cover on August 14th and 15, flying continuous patrols, engaging German bombers before they reach the crippled tanker. The pilots are exhausted. Malta's remaining fuel allows only minimal operations, but they fly anyway, understanding that Ohio's cargo will keep them flying for months. 4 merchantmen have already reached Malta Port: Chalmers, Rochester Castle, and Melbourne Star on August 13th, followed by Brisbane Star on August 14th. These ships carry 32,000 tons of supplies. It is enough to sustain Malta until November. But without Ohio's fuel, aircraft and submarines cannot operate offensively. The siege will continue. Malta will survive but contribute nothing to Allied victory in North Africa. At 800 hours on August 15th, the Feast of Santa Maria, Malta's most important religious holiday, Ohio, is 10 miles from Grand Harbor. The ship is listing heavily to starboard, the deck nearly awash, the bow and stern pointing at the sky like a whale sounding. Maltese civilians line the walls of Valletta watching the tanker approach. They have been informed that this ship carries fuel that will save the island. As Ohio enters the harbor entrance, crowds cheer, then fall silent. Men remove their hats. Women cross themselves. A military band begins playing Rule Britannia, but stops mid-bar. The musicians overcome. A bugle sounds, still the call for silence in the presence of the dead, honoring the sacrifices that brought this ship home. Ohio is moored alongside at 0930 hours. Pumps immediately begin transferring fuel to shore tanks and to the oiler's Boxall and Plumleaf. The work continues without pause for 36 hours. Water is pumped into the cargo tanks as fuel is removed, maintaining buoyancy as the weight decreases. Engineers estimate the ship will sink before unloading completes. They estimate correctly. On the morning of August 17th, as the last fuel is pumped out, Ohio settles on the bottom of Grand Harbor. Her back is broken, her hull breached in multiple places, her structure twisted beyond repair. She will never sail again. In 1946, the hulk is towed out of the harbor and scuttled in deep water bands, playing crowds cheering, honoring the ship that saved Malta. Of 14 merchant ships in Operation Pedestal, 5 reach Malta. 9 are sunk. The escorts suffer equally. The carrier Eagle sunk. The carriers, Indomitable and Victorious, damaged the cruisers. Cairo, Manchester, and Nigeria sunk, or badly damaged the destroyer. Foresight sunk, 3 more destroyers damaged. Total Royal Navy casualties exceed 400 killed. Merchant Navy casualties exceed 350. Italian and German forces lose 2 submarines, several motor torpedo boats, and numerous aircraft. Estimates range from 39 to 80 aircraft destroyed. Accounts differ. By any conventional measure, Pedestal is an Axis tactical victory. The British lose more tonnage than they deliver. The escorts suffer losses far exceeding typical convoy operations. But, strategically, Pedestal is an Allied victory. The 32,000 tons of supplies and 10,000 tons of fuel delivered to Malta allow the island to survive until November, when 2 more convoys operations, Stonehenge and Portcullis, deliver supplies without significant losses. By then, the strategic situation has changed. Montgomery defeats Rommel at El Alamein in October. Allied forces land in northwest Africa. In November, Operation Torch, opening a second front. Axis forces in North Africa are trapped between 2 Allied armies, their supply lines under constant attack from Malta-based aircraft and submarines. Malta's revival is immediate. In August 1942, with the island still besieged, 35% of Axis shipping to North Africa fails to arrive. In September, with Malta resupplied, Allied forces sink 100,000 tons of Axis shipping, including 24,000 tons of fuel destined for Rommel. In October and November, Malta-based submarines and aircraft sink another 230 ships, totaling hundreds of thousands of tons. Rommel's forces starve for supplies. When Montgomery attacks at El Alamein on October 23, German tanks lack fuel for effective counterattacks. Italian infantry lack ammunition for sustained defense. The Africa Corps collapses not because British tactics are superior, though they are improved, but because Rommel cannot sustain his forces. Malta, once besieged and ineffective, becomes the decisive factor in North African operations. The siege formally ends on November 20th, 1942, when Operation Stonehenge reaches Malta without losses. By then, the Luftwaffe has withdrawn most units from Sicily for deployment elsewhere. Italian bombing continues sporadically, but ineffectively. The last air raid alert sounds on August 28, 1944, over 4 years after the first. The all-clear sounds at 2100 hours. Total civilian casualties during the siege: 581 dead, 780 injured. Military casualties exceed 7,500, including wounded. Royal Navy losses include 11 cruisers and 20 destroyers sunk during convoy operations. RF and Fleet Air Arm losses exceed 1,000 aircraft destroyed. The human cost is immense. The strategic achievement is proportional. The German and Italian failure at Malta results from strategic indecision. Operation C3, the planned invasion, is prepared multiple times in 1941 and 1942. German paratroopers train for airborne assault. Italian divisions prepare amphibious operations. Naval forces assemble. The operation is postponed in April 1942, cancelled in July 1942, briefly revived in September 1942, and finally abandoned in October 1942 as Allied successes in North Africa make Malta's capture irrelevant. The reasons for cancellation are multiple. The German invasion of Crete in May 1941 costs 6,000 casualties, demonstrating that airborne operations against defended islands are costly even when successful. Hitler becomes reluctant to risk paratroopers in similar operations. The Italian Navy, despite numerical superiority over British forces in the central Mediterranean, refuses to guarantee the protection of invasion convoys, citing British submarine and air threats. Fuel shortages. Italy receives limited petroleum allocations from Romania, most going to Germany, prevent large-scale naval operations and reduce flight training hours, degrading pilot proficiency. Most critically, the Axis believes aerial bombardment and blockade will force Malta's surrender without invasion. Why risk thousands of casualties in amphibious operations when starvation will achieve the same result? This calculation is not unreasonable. Malta comes very close to collapse in April and July 1942. Food stocks reach critically low levels. Civilian morale falters. If Britain had not mounted pedestal, if that convoy had failed completely, Malta would have surrendered by October 1942. The Axis decision to blockade rather than invade is vindicated by how close that strategy comes to success. But close is not success. Malta survives. The island's survival depends entirely on British willingness to accept catastrophic losses to maintain one forward base. The convoy operations to Malta from 1940 to 1942 cost Britain and the Commonwealth hundreds of ships and thousands of lives. The strategic calculation is brutal. These losses are acceptable if Malta remains operational. A fortress that sinks Axis shipping at rates exceeding Allied replacement capability is worth any price. This is industrial warfare at its purest expenditure of resources for strategic advantage, human lives included in the accounting. The Maltese population's role is critical, but often misunderstood. Civilian courage under bombardment matters, but civilians do not sink ships or shoot down aircraft. They endure. Endurance is not passive. Dockyard workers repair submarines and aircraft under fire. Stevedores unload supply ships while bombs fall. Engineers maintain airfield surfaces, filling bomb craters with crushed stone and rubble, creating runways from destruction. Women staff anti-aircraft batteries, operate radar stations, drive ambulances through burning streets. Without this civilian contribution, Malta cannot function as a military base. The George Cross recognizes this reality. Resistance is collective, involving military and civilian populations equally. Modern military analysis of the siege focuses on radar and intelligence. Malta possesses the most sophisticated early warning system in the Mediterranean. Chain home low radar stations operating on 200 megahertz with a range of 40 miles provide advance warning of incoming raids. This warning time, typically 15 to 20 minutes, allows defenders to scramble fighters, man anti-aircraft guns, and shelter civilians. Without radar, surprise attacks would multiply casualties and damage exponentially. With radar, defenders husband resources, launching fighters only when necessary, positioning anti-aircraft batteries for maximum effect. Intelligence provides equal advantage. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park decrypt German Enigma and Italian C-38 cipher traffic, providing Malta with details of Axis convoy schedules, routes, and cargoes. Submarines and aircraft are positioned along predicted routes. Convoys are intercepted before reaching North Africa. This intelligence-driven campaign is invisible to Axis commanders, who believe their losses result from random patrols rather than systematic targeting. They never realize that British forces read their orders before their own commanders receive them. The combination radar defense and intelligence-driven offense transforms Malta from a besieged fortress into an offensive platform. The island absorbs punishment while inflicting disproportionate damage on Axis logistics. This is asymmetric warfare, a small vulnerable base generating strategic effects far exceeding its size. The British pay enormous costs to maintain this capability. The Axis never develops an effective counter. They bomb relentlessly but never destroy the radar stations or the intelligence infrastructure. They blockade partially but never completely. They threaten invasion but never execute it. Malta survives through British sacrifice and Axis indecision in roughly equal measure. In 1943, as North African operations conclude, Malta becomes a staging base for the invasion of Sicily in July and Italy in September. The airfields bombed repeatedly in 1941 and 1942 now host thousands of Allied aircraft. The harbor, once barely functional under constant attack, becomes a major naval base. Submarines refuel destroyers, rearm cruisers, repair battle damage. The island transitions from defensive fortress to offensive platform, supporting operations that bring Allied forces into southern Europe. The physical scars remain visible for decades. Bomb-damaged buildings are not fully repaired until the 1960s. Entire districts of Valletta and the three cities remain ruined through the 1950s. Limestone walls blackened by fire roofs, collapsed windows empty. The Opera House is not rebuilt, its ruins become a plaza. The Auberge d'Italie is reconstructed, but never recovers its original grandeur. These scars are deliberate. The Maltese government preserves them as reminders of the siege, physical testimony to what the population endured. The George Cross is incorporated into Malta's flag upon independence in 1964. The award given to honor wartime resistance becomes a permanent symbol of national identity. This is unique. No other nation's flag incorporates a British military decoration. It represents the relationship between Britain and Malta during the war, protector and protected, sacrificing together, surviving together. The relationship is paternalistic and colonial, reflecting attitudes of the era, but the sacrifice is mutual and real. Captain Dudley Mason receives the George Cross for bringing Ohio to Malta. It is one of only 3 George Crosses awarded to merchant seamen during the war, recognizing that civilian courage under fire equals military valor. Mason's citation reads, "For outstanding gallantry and devotion to duty in the face of ceaseless attacks by enemy aircraft and submarines." The phrasing is understated. Mason commanded a broken ship, kept a burning tanker afloat, and delivered fuel that saved an island. The George Cross is inadequate recognition. No decoration is adequate. The crew of Ohio receives no collective recognition equivalent to the island's George Cross. Individual decorations are awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Distinguished Service Medal, Lloyd's War Medal for bravery at sea. But the collective effort, engineers fighting fires in flooded compartments, gunners firing anti-aircraft weapons, while bombs fall, deck crew transferring fuel while the ship sinks beneath them, receives no formal acknowledgement beyond these individual awards. This reflects how institutions recognize heroism. Individuals receive medals, groups receive footnotes. Ohio's crew deserves better, so do the thousands of merchant seamen who died bringing convoys to Malta. By the war's end, 486 Allied merchant ships are sunk in the Mediterranean, totaling over 6 million tons. Approximately 15% of these losses occurred during Malta convoy operations. The human cost is proportional. Thousands of merchant seamen die in attacks on Malta-bound convoys. These men are civilians volunteers serving in a military capacity, receiving no military benefits or recognition. Their contribution to Allied victory is immense. Their commemoration is minimal. The Royal Navy's losses in Mediterranean operations exceed 30 cruisers and 60 destroyers, sunk with hundreds more damaged. Thousands of sailors die. HMS Eagle, torpedoed during pedestal, takes 160 men down with her. HMS Manchester, scuttled after torpedo damage, loses 20 men when the scuttling charges detonate prematurely. HMS Cairo, torpedoed and sinking, loses dozens more. These losses are listed in naval records, names inscribed on memorials, but the circumstances that they died, protecting merchant ships carrying food and fuel to a besieged island, are often omitted. The strategic context disappears, leaving only names and dates. Malta's civilian casualties, 1,581, killed over 917 days, are proportionally lower than many British cities during the Blitz, but the concentration is higher. Malta receives 4 times the tonnage of bombs dropped on Dresden, but suffers fewer casualties because the population lives underground. By mid-1942, over 100,000 people occupy excavated shelters and natural caves. Schools, hospitals, and government offices operate below ground. This subterranean existence saves lives, but imposes psychological costs. Children grow up seeing daylight only briefly. The elderly deteriorate in damp, poorly ventilated caves. Respiratory diseases spread. The death rate from illness increases even as bomb casualties decrease. Post-war health surveys document the siege's long-term effects: increased tuberculosis, chronic respiratory conditions, malnutrition-related disorders. These effects persist for decades. Children born during the siege are on average smaller and less healthy than pre-war or post-war cohorts. This is the hidden cost of resistance, the physical damage that cannot be attributed to direct violence but results from prolonged deprivation and stress. The statistics are clinical. The suffering is real. Today, Malta memorializes the siege through multiple institutions. The National War Museum in Fort St. Elmo displays artifacts from the siege: a Gladiator fuselage, anti-aircraft guns, bomb fragments, ration cards. The Lascaris war rooms, the underground headquarters where operations were directed, are preserved as they appeared in 1942: maps on walls, telephones in place, plotting tables marked with convoy routes. The museum at Fort Ranella displays coastal artillery, emphasizing Malta's role as a fortress. These institutions serve educational purposes, ensuring younger generations understand what their grandparents endured. They also serve tourism. Malta's siege is marketed internationally: the heroic island, the brave defenders, the miraculous survival. This is not inaccurate, but it is selective. The narrative emphasizes British sacrifice, the convoys, the fighter pilots, the naval escorts, while minimizing British colonial control and the limited agency available to Maltese civilians. The siege occurs within a colonial framework. Malta has no independence, no self-governance, no ability to negotiate its role in British strategy. The island is defended because it serves British interests. That Maltese civilians suffer for British strategic objectives is unquestioned at the time. Post-war narratives complicate this, but wartime reality is clear. Malta is a British fortress, its population subjects supporting the war effort because they have no alternative. This does not diminish Maltese courage or suffering. It contextualizes it. Resistance occurs within constraints. Civilians endure because evacuation is impossible. There are too many people, too few ships, no safe destination. They cooperate with British authorities because non-cooperation brings punishment. They support the war effort because Axis victory would be worse. These are rational calculations, not moral simplicities. The heroism is real. The choices are constrained. The Ohio Memorial, a small plaque in Grand Harbor, commemorates the tanker's arrival. It does not mention that Ohio was American-built, crewed primarily by British merchant seamen, and commanded by a Welsh captain, a multinational effort reflecting Allied cooperation. It does not mention the 47 men who remained aboard while the ship was towed through constant air attacks, knowing one bomb could vaporize them. It does not mention the destroyers Penn and Ledbury, whose crews risked their lives to bring Ohio home. The plaque is simple, in memory of SS Ohio, whose cargo saved Malta. This understates reality but captures the essential truth that one ship mattered more than it should have, and its crew delivered. Military historians debate whether the Siege of Malta was necessary. Some argue that the island could have been bypassed. Axis convoys routed further west beyond aircraft range, Malta isolated and left to wither. Others contend that Malta's position made this impossible. Any route to North Africa passed within striking distance, and neutralizing the island required constant effort that diverted Axis resources from other theaters. Both positions have merit. The counterfactual cannot be tested. What is certain, the Axis devoted enormous resources to neutralizing Malta. Thousands of bomber sorties, hundreds of fighter missions, submarine patrols, naval operations, all aimed at one small island. These resources could have been employed elsewhere in North Africa, supporting Rommel in the Soviet Union, supporting the Eastern Front offensive in the Atlantic, attacking Allied convoys. Instead, they were expended against Malta, achieving partial success. The island was badly damaged, its offensive capability reduced, but never total victory. Malta survived. That survival cost the Axis opportunities elsewhere. For Britain, the calculation was similar but inverse. Maintaining Malta required resources that could have been employed elsewhere: warships escorting convoys, aircraft defending the island, supplies diverted from other theaters. But Malta's offensive capability justified these costs. The sinking of Axis shipping exceeded replacement rates. Rommel's inability to sustain operations in North Africa resulted directly from supply shortages caused by Malta-based forces. The strategic return on investment was positive, though the human cost was terrible. This is how wars are won, through brutal calculations of resource expenditure and strategic return. Individual heroism matters, collective sacrifice matters. But the determining factor is whether the costs produce proportional advantages. Malta's defense costs Britain thousands of lives and hundreds of ships. Malta's offensive operations cost the Axis hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping and thousands of tons of supplies that never reached North Africa. The ledger favors Britain. The dead on both sides receive no benefit from this accounting. On September 8, 1943, exactly 3 years and 3 months after the first Italian raid, Italy surrenders to the Allies. The Italian fleet sails to Malta and anchors in Grand Harbor, flying white flags, surrendering to the island they bombed for years. Italian sailors disembark under British guard. Maltese civilians line the harbor walls, watching silently. There is no celebration, no jeering, no violence. The crowd observes, bearing witness, saying nothing. The moment crystallizes the siege's end, the attacking force reduced to prisoners, the besieged fortress standing scarred but intact. The German bombers continue operating from Italian bases under German control, but their numbers are reduced and their targets shift to mainland Italy, where Allied armies advance. Malta ceases being a primary target. The sirens still sound occasionally through 1944, but the massive raids of 1942 never recur. The population emerges from underground, reoccupies damaged buildings, begins reconstruction. Normal life resumes, gradually, incompletely, never quite recapturing what existed before the siege. The war ends in Europe on May 8, 1945. Malta, which seemed likely to fall in 1942, survives to see victory. The population has suffered enormous privation, endured years underground, lost thousands of civilians and military personnel. The island's physical infrastructure is devastated: homes, destroyed churches, ruined airfields, cratered. But Malta remains British, remains operational, and has contributed decisively to Allied victory in North Africa and the Mediterranean. The strategic objective, holding the central Mediterranean, is achieved. The cost is paid in blood, hunger, fear, and stone. In the decades after the war, Malta transitions from fortress to independent nation. Independence arrives in 1964. The British military presence diminishes, gradually ending completely when the last Royal Navy units depart in 1979. The dockyard, once employing thousands repairing warships, transitions to commercial shipping. The airfields become civil aviation facilities. The fortifications, no longer militarily relevant, become tourist attractions. Malta transforms from strategic asset to sovereign state. The generation that endured the siege mostly dies by the 1990s. Their children and grandchildren inherit memories, not experiences. The shelters are preserved, but empty. The anti-aircraft guns are museum pieces. The George Cross remains on the flag, a permanent reminder of 3 years when survival required courage, deprivation, and sacrifice in quantities that later generations cannot fully comprehend. The memorials honor this. The history preserves it. The reality, cold-hungry, terrified people living underground while bombs fell and supplies dwindled, is harder to convey. Statistics capture scale. Individual stories capture experience. The totality escapes both. On the plinth, supporting the Siege Bell Memorial in Valletta, the names of 7,000 military personnel and civilians who died during the siege are inscribed. The bell itself cast from brass and aluminum rings daily at noon, commemorating the dead. Tourists photograph it. Schoolchildren study it. Veterans in diminishing numbers visit it. The bell rings, the names remain. The siege, which defined Malta's wartime experience and shaped its post-war identity, becomes history preserved, commemorated, studied, but no longer lived. This is inevitable. Memory fades. Monuments endure. What they commemorate: human endurance in extremity, strategic necessity overriding humanitarian concern. The cost of holding one small island while empires wage total war remains relevant even as the specific circumstances recede into the past. Malta survived. Thousands did not. The survivors built a nation on the ruins of a siege. This is perhaps achievement enough.